like on the continent, we're quite well versed with just having to make do and to find solutions and make solutions ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is why I think like some of the creators coming out of here are the best in the world.
Welcome to today's episode of The Angle, where we dive into the fascinating world of technology meets creativity in Africa. I'm very delighted to have as a guest today Eduardo Cachucho. He's the creative director of the Fak'ugesi Digital Innovation Festival. It's been going on for a number of years, almost 10.
Yep.
Since he's been at the helm for the last couple of years, Fak'ugesi has grown into one of the most dynamic and influential festivals in Johannesburg, in my humble opinion. It's celebrating the intersection of digital technology, art, and African culture. Eduardo has been at the helm for the last 2 years, which I consider quite a nice, stable last 2 years. It's been quite a nice growth of the festival, in my view as well. It's been shaping into a unique platform that empowers emerging African creatives and provides a space for innovation in virtual reality, animation, gaming, and more. In this conversation, we'll explore how the festival champions young African talent, its role in the tech-infused creative economy, and how it's using Johannesburg's vibrant cultural landscape as the perfect backdrop for digital innovation.
Woo! What an intro, man.
Yeah, you know?
Sounds exciting. Am I part of that? Sounds interesting.
It's all about you, man.
So I suppose to kick it off, I think, since you've been there the last couple of years, maybe you can just give an idea of the key changes and milestones you've observed in the festival and how these have shaped the festival's identity today.
Yeah, I would say, I kind of started up at Fak'ugesi in 2022. And I must say, I saw a big difference and I'd been involved with the festival for many years, more as an audience person, because I believe in this work. I think African digital creators are doing some of the most interesting digital work in the world. So that's why I was always really interested. I think COVID was a major turning point, because before that, a lot of people saw Fak'ugesi as a kind of pet project or something kind of cute and interesting. But, there's people doing real big festivals, things like the National Arts Festival, more traditional type of festivals. And people always thought that digital was like a side project. And then obviously in 2020, everyone started totally freaking out and understanding that digital was a real way you had to go in that kind of space. And I remember also engaging with the creative director or the director at the time, Tegan Bristow, and every other festival in the country at the time was going to her and asking advice, asking them how to do things, how do we shift and pivot to digital, because people weren't taking digital seriously and the kind of the gains that can give you and how it can actually help you kind of develop your work and reach new audiences. And I think there was a huge shift after that. People took the festival in a very different way and much more seriously. But then, of course, 2021 was also a really difficult time for funding and coming out of COVID. It was challenging. Omicron came there. So it was quite a difficult year. I managed to then come in the year after that. And then things were kind of back to normal. I think we were also quite lucky because people were very desperate to come back to in-person events. So I think we also leveraged that kind of energy in that year. To put into place a lot of new programs. So I think that's also kind of some of the things we tried to change in the last few years. In 2022, we also initiated the Fak'ugesi Awards, because we realized there was a really big problem on the continent. As I was saying, I think Africa has some of the most interesting artists working in digital around the world. Those people are always showing in these festivals, overseas in Europe, Asia, the Americas. But a lot of times they weren't showing in Africa, they weren't showing back at home. And that is that's pretty, for me, is devastating. So these people are doing amazing work, but you never get to see it. And the culture that it's engaging is actually being shown in places where people have no idea.
So they export the talent, we do the minerals.
Which is, you can also imagine actually, that's crazy. If you put it in that way, it's totally that.
Right.
And I I think it's also psychologically like really devastating for those artists themselves because they understand this thing has value,
Yeah.
but then they're never showing it to an audience that is really going to be like, oh my God. Like
The
this
very
is-
audience that relates to it
Yeah.
are not getting like access to it, but those that
Yeah,
are just seeing it as something that's enticing are getting all the access.
exactly.
So if you were to just explain to somebody who's new to the space, what is digital creative arts and who is Fak'ugesi?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a difficult thing to explain at times because it's got so much technical back end. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people then, when you talk about like digital art or digital creativity, then think like Instagram and like content creation. That's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
But I think maybe that's a good place to start because that's
Okay.
where most people would think.
Is that like the entry point?
Yeah,
into
I would
into
say
creative
so.
arts?
And,
Yeah?
but then I would also say like even the people, the really good content creators would then know what all is required behind the scenes to create
Right.
this stuff. I mean, a good example is now the podcast and the video we're doing now.
Right, right.
Like it looks kind of slick. It will look like it's a nice podcast which you just download and you just watch the video. But
Right.
right now there's like 3 people behind the scenes. There's 3 cameras. There's 3 mics. There's cables everywhere
Yeah,
leading
there's a
to
lot
like
going
a
on.
desk. It's pretty technical and
Yeah, yeah.
requires a lot of people in what we call like the pipeline or the value chain.
Right.
It requires a lot of people that are technically well equipped because also if you hadn't set up the mics properly, it would just sound like crap.
Yeah.
If
yeah.
if the cameras weren't done right, I think that's the big thing is to understand that, and this is why we're also trying to create with the festival, like on one hand we're trying to develop the industry side of things because that value chain is important, but on the other hand also the audience, because
Yeah.
I think an important thing for like young people to understand, and then also the parents I think is important because they need to support the young people in wanting to do these creative
Yeah.
careers, is that there's so much opportunity for employment and also making money, because like if you learn these skills like
Right.
editing a podcast, it's transferable into so many different areas that actually like you're also making sure then that your children are opening up their realm of possibilities. And I think that's the amazing thing of what the kind of digital creative space allows. So I mean that's on the very simple level of content
Right,
creation.
right, right.
If you go slightly deeper, when you're starting to like program
Yeah.
different experiences, then I mean the space of being a programmer and being able to develop those experiences means you open then also another whole level of employment and being able to work with lots of different partners that just
Yeah.
isn't.
And I'm sure there's a
able
lot
to
of
be
skill
done.
also required there, right? You need some skills, you need some technologies that you're able to use.
Yeah, there is. And I think, but this is why I think like African digital creators really have an edge also,
Right.
because it's also not something you necessarily need to go to university to.
Okay.
Actually, most of the best people
Yeah.
like find this stuff out themselves online.
Almost like tech, right? Like coding.
Yeah, yeah,
Some of
it's
your
a-
best coders you'll not necessarily find from a college. It's
Yeah.
those guys that went on YouTube and a bunch of places
School of
learned
life,
code.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
And I think that, like, on the continent, we're quite well versed with just having to make do and to
Right.
find solutions and make solutions ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is why I think, like, some of the creators coming out of here are the best in the world.
Right.
Because
right.
it's just so intrinsic to the way of working. We don't have, like, I mean, South Africa's quite lucky, but other countries in Africa don't have the National Arts Council or funding vehicles for opportunities. So people are like, they're making their own solutions
Right.
and they're finding their own ways to do things, which means that then when they put against on the kind of global scale, you actually see that, wow, people here are innovating actually much more than
Yeah.
other artists would be in Europe, because there's this kind of cushy safety net and somehow you don't really need to push
Right.
the limits so much. But here you do, because if you don't, you're not going to make it.
And I mean, South Africa is rich with culture. I mean, we have 11 official languages, 9 provinces, almost with different kinds of people. Are you seeing the incorporation of this diversity in digital creative arts, especially
Yeah.
in Fak'ugesi? Are you guys exploring those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it comes out very strongly in the content. I mean,
Okay.
and that's also, I think, why we're so keen for Fak'ugesi is to bring some of that work back. I mean, we did try very hard this year to get a work called Kwashukela Shukela by Abisovili. We helped kind of work to showcase that project in Paris last year, but the installation cost of that is just so catastrophically big. It's quite crazy to try and install it like it was in Paris here. But that project, I mean, like Abiso was working between like poetry and indigenous languages and like also folklore about the beginning of time.
Are you saying French people whipped our ass in installing an African-centered story? Or was it like
I mean,
was it a cost thing? Or
it's a cost thing.
Good?
I mean, it's
okay.
so the place where it was installed, La Gaieté Lyrique, has a specific space for immersive installations.
Okay.
It's got like 6 8K projectors that project onto a special wall that has 360 sound. You know, you can't. We looked at trying to temporarily set something up like that, and we were looking at like 2 million rand to set it up for like 2 weeks. That's where you can't compete in a way. That's where it starts to get very difficult because you need like very high level like government investment in infrastructure when it starts getting to levels like that.
I've got a related question to that in the sense like, you know, I mean, Fak'ugesi emphasizes local African productions while recognizing the importance of international collaboration. And I'm just wondering how are you bridging that? How are you working within that? How does that?
I love answering that question because I think it's actually easier than what it seems. Because a good example is like we often get sent to international other festivals and markets, especially to speak with artists for commissions. And I often say that like for Fak'ugesi, actually we have the easiest jobs of all other creative directors and programmers, because when I start the discussion or when our programmers start the discussion, we're always like, hey, listen, this conversation is not going to happen unless you're interested or willing to have a dialogue with African culture and African artists. There is just no discussion. We won't just come and showcase your project as a pristine capsule of your like amazing work that you're doing. It's simply not up for discussion. And actually, I mean, funnily enough, it means that we generally have the strongest conversations with artists because it implies immediately a need to engage with the context. So I think that's where we do quite well in those kind of discussions, because it's then always about, and also what I think culture must be about, is actual engagement and not just showcasing for the sake of it, which I always find extremely boring and uninteresting. It's about engagement, like really thinking about the context and will this work engage people or not. And if it doesn't, I mean, for us at Fak'ugesi, it's just really easy. It's like, okay, it doesn't engage the local context. It's not. We won't program this. We won't put it into the work we're doing.
But in terms of, related to that, in terms of funding, you know, you notice like the Goethe Institute or even the French Institute, they seem to be a lot more active in the creative space locally than even our own government. Do you have some comments on that, or how that might work, or whether you see that improving in the near future?
I think it's improved quite a lot. I mean, I must say, like, for example, we also, I mean, this is the life of, like, doing this kind of work in South Africa. So we also parallel run these other programs like Digital Lab Africa. I'm also the creative director for that. And there's this other thing called Road to Annecy. And that's a really good example because that's like a long-term project. And it's quite a strong collaboration between IFAS and NFEF.
Yeah.
And I think with all of these things, it's just time. Like you need, even for these government organizations, you need time to build up those structures. And I think now it's running for like the 10th year or something like that. And this year, I think it really also reached a point of maturity where people know what's been going on. They know what's worked and also what hasn't worked. So they're able to demand different things of the Annecy Festival, which is like the world's biggest like animation festival, so that you really get the most out of that interaction, and that it isn't just this kind of, you know, like exploitative kind of element from external. Because even I must say, like when we're working with IFAS, it's like there's an understanding that if it's not bi-directional, it's just pointless in the long term, that it won't really have output. So I think there is, I think there's also like the need on the kind of South African side for the government to understand and to continue supporting these organizations like NFF or NAC, because of course they all go through their own like ups and downs and problems, but it's like it's absolutely important we have them. Like we work a lot with like Nigeria and Kenya, and we can see the difference that we have here in South Africa just by having these organizations. Because if you don't have them, like in Nigeria there's no kind of equivalent, and that's catastrophic for the industry. It's really bad. In Kenya there is, but they almost have like zero budget. I mean, there's the what's it called, the KFC, Kenya Film Commission.
They call it the KFC.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's a funny
Easy to remember.
acronym.
Right.
Yeah.
I almost licked my fingers.
And they're also good, but they probably where the NFVF was when it was established in 1994. It takes time. I think they're only like 5 years old or so. It just takes time to build up these mechanisms. I think the most important thing is, I think people can also be like really quick to criticize those kind of organizations.
Right.
But the important thing is not to criticize them to the point that we get rid of them. It's to say, okay, how do we mobilize and activate like people to work there? I think also the problem is then it's very unstable environments.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that it's not as unstable, because there's amazing people there doing good work. But then when you put in that kind of instability of like boards collapsing and like reconfiguring like all the time, it means you're just damaging like that long-term work that's being laid. I think that would be...
Is there misalignment perhaps? So in this sense, what are the key trends that are driving the sector in digital creative arts? And are they aligned with sustainability of the business? Are they aligned with what the sponsors in the space are looking for? Like you mentioned a lot of culture. Who is interested in the South African culture, and who is interested in showcasing this culture? In my head, I would imagine tourism should be, right? Because once you show a lot of this, and in a creative manner, you should be able to attract tourists to come to South Africa, spend a bit of money, and that would contribute to our fiscal. What trends are pushing the industry forward, and do you find those trends to be aligned with what it is that the funders are looking for, or is there misalignment?
That's a good point. I think they do. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that is in action at the moment. Like the KwaZulu-Natal Film Commission has just merged with the Tourism Commission, which I think is very smart.
Oh, interesting.
That's smart.
Yeah,
That's smart.
and I think there's probably more of that going to happen on a national level, which is it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there is alignment. It just takes time. Again, it's like a thing of time, because government moves slowly, whereas the industry moves slightly faster, and that's just the reality of the kind of life in that space.
Right.
But I think there has been a kind of converging in the last few years, and that is because like all the players are really actively speaking to each other. Like this year, for the first time with the Jobs Fund, they've kind of, there's a gaming consortium that's been put together, which Hong is part of that, as well as a few other players, and that's also been coming off of research that was like developed in 2022. So it takes time for these things to build up, but I think there is a convergence. Again, it's about like, are we supporting these organizations long term and making sure that they have like long-term stability to be able to like roadmap things into the future? Because I think the thing with the kind of digital creative space, because it's so technically based. Let's say a good example is like making animation, for example. Let's say you're working with Disney to make like Kizazi Moto.
Yeah.
There's a level of production that Disney needs that is only possible probably with like 1 or 2 studios on the whole continent. And that those studios only have so much capacity, and they are already at the total limit of their production. So that's also part of what we try and do in Fak'ugesi on the kind of intermediaries side, or what we call intermediaries, which is like the industry side, is trying to grow that part of the industry, because we just don't have enough people that can deliver the work in that space. So we need to like connect all of those dots together. It's a long-term thing. It's sometimes it's daunting, like actually looking at that and being like, okay, well, actually we need to train like, 20,000 like 2D animators to be able to deliver
Right.
at
For
that level, and you know
capacitation,
it's
right?
actually just impossible,
Yeah.
even continent-wide.
So you referenced Tshimologong there when you spoke. Do you find spaces like Tshimologong to be helpful for organizations like Fak'ugesi? And I mean, what would you say that Fak'ugesi has benefited from having been hosted at Tshimologong? For those who may be wondering what is and who is Tshimologong, it's a digital precinct in Braamfontein, 41 Jutta Street. You'll find a lot of entrepreneurs there in tech and other spaces. Some of the products that you see here are from the maker space at the precinct. That's Mla with the African speakers. That's Mpo with the robotics. We'll leave the descriptions. We'll leave the details in the descriptions below. But yeah, I was just asking.
Plus, you meet amazing guys like us there.
Yeah.
I forgot myself. Amen. So yeah, but does Tshimologong help? And I'm asking, how does it enable Fak'ugesi to thrive? What is it part of your sustainability model, and how does that tie in?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think that's also maybe coming back to Scott, your question around like some of the things that we started like over the last few years in the programming was trying to connect the dots between different programs. I think we did that in these first 2 years. Now in this third year, we're trying to do that more in the kind of other digital innovation spaces. But the work in the first 2 years was really trying to tie up the work in what we call Digital Content Hub, which is animation, video games, XR, because that gives a depth to the program of Fak'ugesi that you otherwise wouldn't get. Like if you're just doing like festival on festival and engaging artist by artist, you don't have a depth of like Digital Lab Africa, for example. We work with creators for like 5 years.
Yeah.
Or like they're developing their XR project, for example, and taking them to market. It takes a long time to develop the project. But then when they're ready, we're ready to engage them directly into the festival. And it's not like we're starting a new conversation. We've been working with them for years. And I think that's also the hope. This year we've been engaging other departments of Tshimologong, like enterprise development, which is more like, you know, high-level entrepreneurs trying to develop their digital innovation projects.
Yeah.
We're trying to do that more, and I think that's like that adds depth. It means that your engagement is not just like one-offs and you're making a call and then people quickly come in. And I think that is the kind of thing you need for a festival like Fak'ugesi to not just be surface level, because then oftentimes it can be. If you're going to very commercial festivals, there's a kind of, I'm trying to say this in a nice way. There's a flatness often, which I struggle to deal with because I like to get into like meaty content and things that really mean something. I don't have a problem with like the commercial world. It's fine. You know, I also like to just buy stickers it's necessary. But then I also think like in terms of if you're dealing with real engagement with African culture, it can't just be surface, or it just becomes another advert, another like object that you can just buy into temporarily. And I think that is one of the things where Scott, you talked about this a bit, about Fak'ugesi being a bit niche, and I do agree in that, but in the best way possible. That what niche allows you is for real deep discussion, and that's often what we talk about Fak'ugesi being. Is it's a place where every year the best people working in that space and people who are really engaged can really meet and have really deep and juicy discussions. It's not like surface level and vanity based. It's really about what are we doing? How are we trying to change this industry? And I think that is really having gains in the last few years. We can see the shift in the industry.
So one conversation I've had over many years now, in fact, is in a space that I've moved around quite deeply is the gaming industry, the local indie development industry. And for some years now, there's been the idea that we've got the talent here, we've got the skills here, we've got guys that doing very much under the hood, doing international work for the most part. And also making it internationally, that also applies itself to the VR space. And a lot of the idea was that, with this kind of talent, we will start attracting AAA studio type work. And the idea behind that is, my suggestion would be not quite yet, simply because we don't really have the scale of studio space. Doesn't mean we won't get there. But also my general feeling around it is that it's, I don't want to say it shouldn't go there. Everyone wants to go to the bigger play, the bigger commercial games and so forth. But there's a sense of really unique stuff keeps coming out of South Africa.
Yep.
And I think there's a spillover, there's a trickle over into the larger economy around that, not necessarily here. And my general viewpoint would be, Fak'ugesi plays some sort of role in bringing those kind of works, at least somewhat a little bit more into the public eye locally. I think most people that I chat to, they don't actually realize how much of an impact South Africans are having in these markets but they don't make it here.
Yeah.
There's examples of them making it here. And that's, I don't know what your comment is on that. I mean, yes, there's some funding involved in that. There's some courses, even on WITS, the game development course, for example. But there's an access to market, or there's something tangible that's missing. We're doing really good work, but we're not necessarily. It's not known here. And where do you see Fak'ugesi kind of playing in that space? Or
I mean, that's true. I mean, I would say there was also this, I mean, that had already collapsed quite a few years ago, this AAA kind of gaming, like mega studios. And I think Canada was like a really good example of that. Industry basically completely collapsed, and it just took a few big players to pull out strategically, and the whole thing vaporized very quickly. So I think actually, I would say we're on the right track to be on the other side and more niche and culty, because it allows for like a slower, more sustainable growth that I think is necessary in the kind of context that we have. And I think like what we are, and this year we kind of building on that a bit with, we're creating this thing called Dala Corner, which is like an African gaming arcade. For that very reason, it's to then spotlight these really amazing video games are happening, but most people don't even know that they exist, or some people know them and then they don't even realize there's South African studios that are developing this work. I think for me that's also more interesting, because you're right in that those games that are coming out are so unique that you're like, what the hell is going on? Like a good example is like Space Salad Studio, which they actually started at Moloto in the kind of early years. Released this game called Hot Buns. Whenever I explain it to people what the game is, they're like, are you for real?
Hot Buns.
Hot Buns. Buns is in like buns, like Nicki Minaj buns.
I thought as much.
So I mean, the game is basically, the characters are these buns, like asses, basically, that they have flatulence, and it's like a platformer game, and you kind of battle with other people.
Wait, you battling with ass?
You ass battle, yeah. And people love it. I mean, they did a really nice kind of like battles with people where they could win prizes at Avijosi recently, and people were just loving it. People in Japan love it because they love like weird, quirky stuff. So I think that's also like where the real niche will be for creators here. Free Lives has recently released something called Angerfoot, which is also just an insane concept, but people are freaking out about it online. It's just like a first-person shooter. I put in like inverted like in quotations, because it's from the angle of a foot, which is just totally crazy. I mean, it also looks visually really spectacular. I think like stuff like that can only really come out of then like a very intense like cultural melting pot where the references are so like multifarious that you just wouldn't get that elsewhere. And I think we need to lean into that. I think it's a little bit like how Japan just really leans into its kind of cultural heritage, and they don't try and make excuses for it or apologize for it. They're just like, here, this thing is really weird, it's out there. Like I think we need to lean more into that, rather than, I actually think to follow, at least in gaming, to follow too much the kind of AAA will really be impossible, because we just don't have that level of capital. And if we're getting external input, it's going to be so unstable that at any time it could be retracted.
The thing is, we have that level of interest. Like if you go to a local game jam or game dev meetup, there's armies out there of people
Yeah.
involved in games and wanting to get involved in games, but the market doesn't support it just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to also slowly build that. I mean, it's like I for example, I just immediately buy any local game from a studio just to like support that in a small way. And I guess that's also, Fak'ugesi is kind of part of that. I know we have big talks about this in the industry. Like we don't have free tickets for the festival, and that's almost like it's a very strong position that I think we've held, is that no, it shouldn't be free.
Yeah.
Even the prices for the tickets are as minimal as they can be, so they're not out of reach. But I really think that it's necessary to create a culture where we need to support this. People are going out there, they're buying movie tickets for like a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Why the hell not support like local creators?
Creative arts.
I think it's important to push that narrative,
Yeah.
because we have to. I mean, if you're not supporting a young game studio like Space Salad buying the game on Steam, then what the hell are we doing? Like, why are we engaging in the creator space at all? You know?
Are you only leaning more towards gaming, or are there other technologies that you are considering in the space, in the industry in general, like the creative arts space? There's a lot of fear around things like AI in many other industries. AI is going to take our jobs. AI is going to AI this, AI that. AI is a threat. Now, in creative arts, I cannot imagine the narrative is different. I mean, if you're creating a lot of these things digitally, and there's now technologies like AI, is there fear that AI will potentially take people's creativity away, or does the industry rather see AI as a complement into the space? And how is the industry taking on things like AI, VR, and
it's like it's a complex discussion, but we've been dealing with it quite a lot at Fak'ugesi. We had something called Cafe AI earlier in the year, which was like a collaboration between us and the South African Cultural Observatory, which really dove into those questions. I mean, I'm more like an optimist in that space. In fact, we have a huge stream of AI-related elements during the festival.
Okay.
So Meta is supporting the festival this year, is specifically around the AI stream. I see they had a big launch yesterday around new things that they're doing. I think the kind of apocalyptic side is really blown out of proportion. And I'll give a good example. So the big showcase that we have this year at Fak'ugesi is called Chimère. And that's Chimère, yeah. It's like a big collaborative AI project. It's a project between Switzerland, Lesotho, and South Africa.
Okay.
And Chimère is a bot that these people have built that's only been trained on artist and activist archives. So that includes like from Switzerland, from Lesotho, from South Africa. So this means that this bot is very like aware of, and socially conscious and also artistic at the same time. And it's been built on the Llama as the base, because this is open source.
Right.
You can build what you want out of it, and you also then own that IP yourself. So basically, they built this model. It's multimodal, so it can work in image, video, and audio, and text. And this group of artists from Switzerland, Lesotho, and South Africa will be improvised, performing, and engaging with this AI model throughout the festival.
Interesting.
And I think what's so interesting about that is then it starts to like blur the lines of like, what is this AI thing? And what am I as an artist? Because then what happens when you have an artist improvising directly with an AI and there's a back and forth? So it's able to dialogue. It's not just like a one way. So the AI will then start feeding you some audio, you perform with the audio, it takes the feedback back, and it will give you a new piece of audio in relation to your other one.
I'm also of that same angle. I'm generally pro tech, and I think we'll see some amazing collaborations, much deeper collaborations with technology than we've ever seen before. And it's still going to be human creativity. It's not like, oh, it's not now.
Right. It's all automated and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting thing here is that because it's been trained on archives of activists and artists, it's intrinsically human in itself, because the data it's pulling from is from
It's trained from
us.
human.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So I think that's also an important thing to keep on framing. I think a lot of the way it's being framed in the news is this other kind of thing, but it is our human repository.
Right.
And
right. And
I
pulling
think that's
from
why
that,
it's also important that this stuff is open source. I mean,
Yeah.
I've got quite a strong feeling about that. I mean, I won't name specific companies, OpenAI. It's a real problem when these things are like locked and enclosed. I think it's really important that like Europe is pushing hard to regulate that space, because it's absolutely critical. We cannot let them just like build these repositories and then start charging us for the rest of our lives to engage with that content. That's the number
crazy.
one criteria for me. That's not
Yeah.
acceptable. Yeah.
That's crazy. I remember we did a story with Prof. Gechi at the Tyresha Vet School of Governance, and in that story, she was talking about how AI machines are trained on our content.
Yeah.
They take that data and they go, and human beings as well,
Yeah.
right? They take that data, they go develop products, and they sell them right back to you. Again,
yeah.
almost like taking your minerals away.
Yep.
You refine
Yeah.
them, you bring them back, and you sell them right back to the people. But tell me, are things like NFTs a thing in the space? Like, what do you call them? Non-fungible tokens?
Yeah.
Do you find that there's an uptake in that space for people to own and sell their products digitally?
Yeah, it was interesting. Last year we were kind of commissioned by quite a few organizations to do research around NFTs. I must say that whole space has died down quite a lot, and I won't say that it's not that those things aren't relevant. I just think that the crypto space is too volatile at the moment, and too
Is it that it's so associated with scams and right?
it's too speculative, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's
At the moment, it will be the future of currency in the future, but I think at the moment it's just such a minefield. At the end of all of that research and output, our kind of recommendation was that actually we can't recommend this and put this forward to African artists because it's too predatory on most people, and it's actually extracting more money from artists than it's putting in. Of course, artists did really well in that short bubble, but I think it was much more extractive. What they don't show is how much money they were actually making from a broad base of people, and then you got a few artists who made a few million here, but then what about all the other artists who pumped in 1,000 here, 1,000 there? We found it very predatory. So our stance then at Fak'ugesi was that we did not engage directly in NFT work.
And how do you sell? How do you make money? Do people have platforms where they can sell their art?
Not directly through Fak'ugesi. So we work through funding models to run the festival. I mean that is something we've been talking about but actually we want to work with more old school models like auctions, to like community kind of sourcing of funding. I think that's more interesting because it also builds community around it, and it's like the thing about supporting video gamers, like video game studios. It starts building a model of like you've got to support your community and be engaged in it and want it to actually survive.
So I think I do want to ask you a little bit about the awards. We won't do that in this session. We'll do it afterwards as we agreed, because this particular episode will be published before the awards are announced. But so in closing, how do you just give us an idea of how you feel over the next few years, Fak'ugesi's, playing in the space? I mean, I think when we first spoke about a week ago, you referred to it as like a cultural artifact. And maybe describe what you mean by that and how you've seen that playing out in the future, in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that quite a lot over the last few days, actually after we had that conversation, and I was like, I can see a good example is like now Fak'ugesi was only in its third year, but because it's kind of starting to concretize the fact that people are making work and they're looking forward to like, I want to apply to the awards and hopefully get one, is that the quality of the work has really like skyrocketed each year, and this year the quality is just really unbelievable, like the work that's come through. And it's made me think like, oh wow, if this is only in the 3 years, like imagine what that means in 10 years.
Right.
Like, you know, I was trying to think like, I wonder what, you know, the Oscars must have been pretty janky in the first 3 years, and there must have been some pretty like weird and terrible like movies in those first few years. And what you think about what those industries are now. So I've been thinking like, okay, what would that mean in 10 years time? Like another 7 years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know that the level of work that's going to be available at that time is going to be really incredible, but the archive of like seeing that develop over time will also be interesting. So in terms of this kind of artifact, it's like, what does that mean as a beacon for people to see like, oh, in this year, those artists won the thing. And I'm thinking of myself applying this year and possibly winning that category and benchmarking myself against that artist I thought was amazing in 2023. I think that's something quite special to develop. So I've been quite proud in thinking like, oh yeah, we started that in 2022, and it keeps building and growing. And I think that's, again, it's something more about community actually than even the awards, and it's a thing that we were surprised of. Even in the first year of the awards, we just made the awards and we were running it, so we weren't thinking too much about it, and we invited everyone, and people came really dressed up like insanely. We were just so busy developing it, and now it's also become a thing that there's like a theme for people coming to the awards. We know people are going to come dressed up. It's a big fashion show. I've got my outfit ready because I know you need to look good. So I guess it's about,
I can't wait to see that outfit.
It's like about building the culture also, and that we're proud of these things and we want to kind of show them off.
Fak'ugesi this year is bigger, man. Why is it just the buzz around the precinct? I mean, we see you running around, man, like a headless chicken every day. Is it what's different this year? Are there more categories? Can you go into what categories are there?
Yeah, actually, we also added a category this year for design, also from feedback. And I think, now we're talking this year about like, we've really missed on the VFX. Like next year, there should be another category for VFX because people have applied in the current categories, but it is its own unique thing. Okay. So I guess, again, it's the thing about then hearing feedback. Even last year, there were a lot of video game applications that were demos that were kind of disqualified because we required the games to be finished, and then we were like, well, why can't there be a demo category? So there was some really actually I can't get into I was going to reveal something about the winners. So it's about then having the feedback with what people are applying with, and then what people feel like is not being represented, and then continuing to add things.
So the categories are a lot this year.
Yeah, we've added design, and then there's like subcategories that have been added so that there's real representation for each of those art forms and maybe things we hadn't expected. Right. Yeah.
And how many days is the event?
Oh, it's in less than a week, so it's like 6 days away now. Yeah.
Ooh. So for those listening, it's at the Tsimokholong precinct, which is the 2nd to the 5th of October.
Yeah.
Is it a 3-day thing?
Yeah, so the industry program starts on the 2nd, and the kind of official opening. And then for the general public, you can start coming in from the 3rd to the 5th of October. There's tons to see, from the video game arcade there's lots of XR, VR works to see. There's lots of installations. There's queer animation also that will be showing.
Animation.
Yeah, there's a project called Queer Catalyst which you've been running. There's really kind of something for everyone, and also at all different age ranges.
Interesting.
Fantastic. Should we wrap it up there?
Yep.
I do want to grab it for 5 minutes just to discuss the awards.
Okay.
So, thanks so much for coming in. I know you're a busy man these days to getting Fak'ugesi up and running, so appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks so much.
We should see about the precinct. It's like this.
True.
All right, man.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, thanks so much. Today we were talking to Eduardo Cachucho. He's the creative director of the Fak'ugesi Festival that's currently going on, or will be going on from the 2nd to the 5th of October at the Tsimokholong precinct, which is at 41 Jutta Street in Braamfontein, Johannesburg. A growing festival that admittedly I've been hanging around with for many years, and it's only now that we're getting to a space where we're covering it appropriately. So thanks so much for his time.
Yeah, man. Please do check out the Fak'ugesi event. It's a kicker. A lot of creatives there. It's you don't want to miss it. 41 Juta Street, Tsemelhome Precinct. Anyhow, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Angle Podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, the Daily Dot Store with all the furniture. The nice creative stuff that you see over here are from the precinct as well. At the maker space, we've got Mla with the African speakers, and we have Paul with the robotics there. So we'll leave all the details in the description below, and you can follow the guys and buy some of their products. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, set on the notification bells. Follow us on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. That's the Angle.Africa. Thank you so much for tuning in. Till next time.